During the 1990s and early 2000s, Nintendo had a real thing for making pinball games, and they made quite a few of them. Turns out that a lot of these are extremely difficult games, some of the most difficult that Nintendo has ever produced. So let's take a look at what makes every one of them such a challenge to actually complete. We'll only be focusing on games with some sort of Nintendo branding in them, as this video would be way too long if I tried to play every pinball game. I'm already struggling enough. So, to start off adventure, let's take a look at one of the first pinball games Nintendo ever released, creatively named Pinball. Pinball is probably the easiest out of Nintendo's entire pinball cabinet. Released in 1984 for the NES, it plays a lot like a regular pinball cabinet that you would find in like a Pizza Hut in the early 2000s. God, saying that makes me feel so old. The game is split up into two halves, the lower half and the top half. The top half of the board has plenty of ways to earn points by hitting some point orbs and making the pinball fall through certain areas of the board. The real action though happens at the bottom half of the board. Here, you can find everyone's favorite things, such as cards and chickens. If you manage to flip all the cards, you would get some stuff to save the pinball from falling. Hitting the 1 through 7 on the side would allow the pinball to get back to the top. And if you hit the pinball into this red circle thing, you get to play the first minigame of the entire Nintendo franchise of pinball, starring Mario and Marlena. This is the hard part of the game, as this game plays like absolute hell. See, you need to match up the numbers with some colors, and they have to be in order. This is really difficult to do, because the ball just kinda doesn't feel right, at least to me. And if you at any point drop it, that's the end of the minigame and you have to make the shot to get back there, making it pretty difficult. Next on the list is Kirby's Pinball Land. It was released in 1993 and made a way better pinball game than, well, pinball. Nintendo started to utilize their equipment and power of the digital platform to add more into pinball, aka the power of the Game Boy. The biggest addition here is the addition of boss battles, which from this point forward will be in every single pinball game. The game is broken up into levels and you'd have to climb to the top of each board to face off against the final boss. The only way to climb was to complete certain tasks to get higher. For example, the Poppy Bros path had you need to hit a big Kirby to get a squishy so he would toss you to the higher level of the board. Then you'd have to hit some eggs and keep enemies away from them so they wouldn't restart your progress back to 0. Only after you did all that would you have the chance to actually fight the boss. When you finally got to the boss, if you happened to fall off, you would lose all progress. And I mean all progress. There was also a chance for you to fall straight down to the absolute bottom of the level if you were really unlucky, and you'd have to complete every single task again. The other bosses in the game are Wispy Woods, Kracko, and King DDD. Pretty much all the bosses in the original Kirby games. Moving right along, we have Pokémon Pinball. It was released in 1999 on the Game Boy. This one is actually pretty tame in difficulty, as most of the difficulty came from actually completing everything in the game. For the goal of this game is to collect all 151 of the original Pokémon. You have 2 different stages to pick from, red and blue, and different environments that have different Pokémon that are picked when you first launch into the game. There are 3 ways to get Pokémon in this game. The first way is to complete a certain task and score enough points to spawn the Pokémon in the middle. Then you need to hit them enough to capture them. The other way is to evolve Pokémon that you've captured. You can do this by, once again, completing a side task that will unlock the ability to evolve a Pokémon. In this case, it's getting past this Ditto monster and making it into the hole at the top. Then, to evolve your Pokémon, you have to hit certain items around the map that spawn in. Last way is the bosses, and this time there's quite a few of them. One of them is hitting your pinball into a large group of Diglets, and then hitting a Dugtrio at the end. Another has you hitting a bunch of Ghastly, Haunters, and then a big final boss, Gengar. Another where you hit a Meowth and he drops some coins, and he looks adorable. Just look at this picture. This is lovely art. Then, at some point, you get to fight the final boss of the game, Mewtwo, and he's kind of lame. He just sits there and honestly takes the beating from the Pokeball. He spawns what I'm assuming are black holes to defend himself, but they really don't do much. So the main difficulty in this game is just getting all 151 Pokemon, because it's very time consuming. Nintendo then decided to take about 3 steps back in the world of pinball, and we got Pokemon Pinball Mini. It's pretty much just like the first Pokemon pinball game, except for on a much weaker handheld platform. I'd say it's about the strength of the McDonald's game toy, honestly, but I don't own a Pokemon Mini, and I didn't even know existed until the start of this video, so I'm going to assume this one was decently easy. In 2003, though, Nintendo released the next Pokemon pinball game, Ruby and Sapphire, and this game plays a lot like the original pinball as well, except for has more bosses and more difficulty behind them. Being split into 2 boards again, Ruby and Sapphire, the Ruby board has you face off against a Kecleon who will turn invisible unless you hit the tree in the back of the stage, which will knock down some goggles that let you actually see him. There's also a fun side minigame in here featuring seals where you have to score basketball hoops with them, and just look at them. Once again, I just love the design. They're so cute. Everything else fills me with rage, but this makes me happy. The big boss of the Ruby board is Groudon. Groudon throws hands. He will drop rocks from the roof, blocking the pinball, summon walls of fire to protect himself, and launch fire at the pinball, stopping it for a good amount of time. This time, it feels like we're actually fighting bosses, and they're darn near impossible. Especially with the time limit in the top corner, telling you to hurry up or lose. The Sapphire board is harder overall, but they also got a lot more lazy with the first boss area. It's just the Gengar level again, but this time with a Duskull and Dusclops. Same gimmicks and everything. Here, you get to fight Kyogre, who is effectively stronger than Groudon. He can send out a cold wave that will freeze your ball, summon whirlpools that will suck up your ball and drag it to who knows where, as well as the ability to swim underwater, making him basically invincible until he decides to come up. After catching either Groudon or Kyogre, you then get a face-off against Rayquaza. Rayquaza is a much harder version of Kyogre, honestly. He can fly around, making him unable to get hit by the pinball, summon lightning to hit the pinball, and make tornadoes that will straight up launch the ball into who knows where. Now, a fun fact with all 3 of these is there's a chance that you're just not fast enough and they'll just leave. You still get points for winning the level, but you don't catch them because you weren't fast enough. This makes this whole thing ridiculously hard and frustrating because just to get to them, you have to catch 6 Pokemon without losing all your balls. And the only real way to get another pinball is to have 99 coins, which that in itself takes a long while. This game's just hard. In 2004, the gloves finally come off for Nintendo. They released Mario Pinball Land. This is by far the strangest and most difficult of all the pinball games. Mario controls like butter. Like actual butter. It's a slip and slide in there. Trying to aim him is almost impossible, and the game is 3D, meaning that Mario can get some air. And some areas of the game require Mario to basically fly. The game has you going around collecting stars and getting enough to face off against the game's bosses. The stars are mostly consistence of hit X in a certain time limit, but Mario controls so badly it's almost impossible. The bosses for this game are Piranha Plant, who will try to eat Mario, Puckerfish, who needs to be hit by a bomb pinball before Mario can even hit him, so now you're dealing with 2 buttery smooth pinballs, Boo, who becomes invisible if you hit the pinball directly at him, that one's actually not that difficult of a mechanic, and King Bowser, who you need to do 360s around the map to knock down thwomps, raise them back up and do it again just to hit him. Then you have to pinball Bowser into the wall until it breaks, sending him into the stratosphere. Needless to say, this game is not easy. The last game that Nintendo made that had their branding on it was 2005's Metroid Prime Pinball, and it's based off of the actual Metroid Prime, instead of just being a themed game. Though I don't really know anything about Metroid Prime series, the game still kinda plays a little bit difficultly, as it's mostly dealing with bosses, and figuring out what you need to do is probably the very bane of my existence. I don't know what I'm looking at because I've never played Metroid. Granted, I shouldn't be playing a Metroid-based game if I've never touched Metroid, but still. The bosses for this game are this Rock Dude, Omega Pirate, Meta Wrigley, and Metroid Prime. And it's not too bad, the bosses. Rockman is just hit him a bunch. The Omega Pirate is honestly the same thing, just hit him a bunch. Meta Wrigley is literally just getting pinballs into holes. I don't even think you really fight him. And Metroid Prime is more just hit him. They don't really do a whole lot. Though the game does have 8-player multiplayer, which is neat. Overall though, Nintendo did some really cool stuff with pinball throughout the late 90s and early 20s. They also made some of the most challenging games that I have ever played. I might just be bad at pinball, but as far as I'm concerned, this stuff is Nintendo's most difficult games.